again, I have a bias against like the kind of pop culture self-help because it just like I wasted so much time with it. But this idea that it's like, never mind the past, just like, you can visualize and just look forward and create the life you want. It's like, well, there's a lot of very powerful wiring that came from our past.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. Nate Rifkin dropped out of college, felt suicidal, went broke, bankrupt, and even worked on the street corner waving around a sign. Now he's successful, fulfilled, and happily married. His journey into Daoism made the difference. He's also the author of The Standing Meditation, Excel in the Modern World Using an Ancient Practice. Welcome, Nate.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So I know we have a lot to talk about, but I guess we should start at the beginning. Depression, a lot of people understand what that is. A lot of people suffer from depression. What was your specific experience with it? How did it show up for you?
It showed up with a tremendous amount of looping, like self-hating thoughts. Sometimes I would blink my eyes and an hour or two had gone by. And I mean, I could trace it back to just like childhood because I grew up in a pretty like emotionally shut down, loveless family. I either had like hostile or absent parents. And I quickly became a pretty angry, hostile kid. And as I grew older, that anger turned inward into depression. So we can talk about it later, but what I've been learning from my Daoist teachers in the lineage is that depression is the result of, it was originally some kind of emotional shock, which turned to anger. And when that anger it isn't really properly processed, it can turn towards yourself. And that turns into depression, which is why a lot of people who are depressed end up exhausted,
Right.
Because they're spending all their energy attacking themselves. So that's where I ended up as. I wasn't so much like exhausted all the time, but it was the looping thoughts, and this is when I was in my mid-20s or early mid-20s because I dropped out of college at this point. I was trying to make a life as some kind of entrepreneur, business owner, and I was just racking up more and more debt, which was scary. But it wasn't what made me depressed. What made me depressed was really just how lonely I felt because I was just an awkward person. Having that social connection with other people it is a really vital part of who we are, especially if we don't have that spiritual part of our lives, which I did not. So that was like my rock bottom.
Yeah. So what helped you? How did you come to Taoism?
I actually bumped into it accidentally because at first I was really super into self-help. And we're talking like the more pop culture self-help. Like I learned about like setting goals and visualizing all like the hopes and dreams you wanted, then taking action, working hard. And I did work hard. And nothing really worked out as I'd wanted to. I didn't really get what was going wrong at the time, but I became very frustrated and bitter and jaded about the whole thing. And I almost wondered if I were cursed. And I got actually so nihilistic about at my life that's when I started drinking alcohol every morning because I figured, well, who cares? Obviously, this is my mindset. Obviously, what I'm doing right now isn't working. All this stuff isn't working. So I might as well just drink if I want to feel good. So what happened was I had a teacher at the time that I was learning business and marketing from. And he wasn't really open about it at first, but he had a spiritual side to him. And he was learning and studying and practicing a spiritual tradition called Daoism. Now, I had no idea what that was, but he decided to start introducing it to his students because, his students were also interested in developing themselves on a personal level. And he would tell these stories, and it kind of caught my eye. He talked about like enlightened beings who would meditate in caves and who would like work with energy and stuff like this. And it appealed to my ego because it was like, ooh, it's secret.
Yeah.
This is cool. It's like it's
Sure.
exotic. Which is great. I'm so happy it happened. So he started teaching that not only is there a philosophy to Taoism, which almost everyone has heard, even if you haven't, even if you don't know you've heard of it, everyone's probably heard of it. Like the idea or the quote, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. I mean, that's a Taoist quote that comes from the Tao Te Ching. So he said there's not only a philosophical side to it, but they also had a very practical school of meditation and working with your energy. And one of the foundations is a meditation done standing up. So he taught how to do this. And I decided, okay, I'll do it, and I'll do it every day, and I'll see what happens. So I picked a time in the morning. I decided, okay, I drink alcohol every morning, so I'll do this right before. And I was a practical guy. So
got to fit it in, got to keep a schedule. Yep.
That's right. I was a busy guy.
Yeah. Pencil that right in. Yeah.
Right. So, but I'm glad I did. And it was interesting because I could describe it briefly. The meditation is done, you're standing, but it's not like you're staying in line, like waiting at the bank or something like this. Your feet are facing straight forward, and they're wider than your shoulders. So they're actually pretty decently wide out. Okay. And you tuck your hips. I like to describe it as if you're sitting on a really high bar stool. So to sit on a really high bar stool, you kind of have to tuck your hips forward a little bit, and unlock your knees a little bit. And that's how you stand. And it actually, when you do this, you feel like you're pressing into the ground more. And then you hold up your hands like you're hugging a tree, or you're hugging or holding a really, really big beach ball. And then you tuck your chin down. So what you're doing with tucking your hips and tucking your chin down is you're actually stretching and lengthening your spine.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, the thing about this is, when I tried it, I mean, my thighs were cooking after like a minute because I unlocked my knees. And I was a guy, I would work out and lift weights, but this was it was working with my body and my tissues in a whole new way. So I'm like, okay, I'll just do a minute because this is tough. And every day I'll add 5 seconds. I'm thinking, haha, I'm gonna make my body stronger, but slow enough that I'll get used to it.
Right.
Well, what happened was, I started to feel a buzz doing it. I felt pretty good day after day. And it was just a minute, so it was easy. And eventually what happened is I would get that feeling of a buzz, and then I'd still go drink alcohol. Now, I drank vodka and an energy drink. That was like my morning breakfast. And every day I noticed like the buzz I would get from meditating started to catch up to the buzz from alcohol.
Wow.
And one day, it was like the same. I just felt a little bit more drunk when I took my first few sips of vodka. So I thought to myself, I wonder what's going to happen if this trend continues. Well, within a day or two, what happened was I got so buzzed from meditating that when I took the drink of alcohol, I felt worse. Yeah. Now the alcohol's effects didn't change, but what changed was me.
That's right. Yeah.
So I actually stopped drinking the alcohol in the morning. And this is just my story. It's just, I'm not saying it's what's going to happen to everyone, but literally like the bottle stayed in my freezer until I moved out of my condo. I just had no urge to touch it then. So that's when I realized, this is probably the only thing that's ever really worked out for me. Wow. So I decided to actually dedicate my life to it. And that was like 12 years ago, 13 years ago.
So how long was your meditation by the time the buzz caught up to the alcohol? How long were you doing it in the morning?
Well, that's a great question, because I was adding 5 seconds, but as I got stronger, I got more confident. I started adding more. So I got to like 3 minutes. I'd be like 3.5, 4. And probably by the time I stopped drinking, it was at the 10-minute mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and I kept it
really got used to it. You really got a chance for your body to integrate the benefits of the meditation.
Yeah. And not only that, as the time increased, I was able to take it deeper
Mm,
because, we all go through stages where we have to like kind of get used to something psychologically and get
right.
settled with it. And then as I got used to it on a physical level and a mental level, I could start taking it deeper and
Mm,
really feeling more the more profound benefits.
yeah, beautiful. So for people who don't know, and I don't know if there's a quick way to answer this, but take as much time as you need. What is Taoism?
Oh, sure. Well, it's a spiritual tradition. It goes back thousands of years. From what I understand, originally, shamans in present day Siberia started practicing the more like esoteric techniques in Taoism, and then they traveled down to China. And when they settled in China, that's where Taoism proliferated. And it's a tradition that is summarized with the idea that you seek harmony through balance. This could be and with your environment. And it was interesting to me because everywhere in the world we have all kinds of spiritual traditions. We have South American spiritual traditions. We have Hinduism. We have Buddhism. Of course, we have Taoism. We also Christianity and all kinds of different traditions. They all have a philosophical component, a religious component, and a mystical component too. Um, and some of these are lesser known than others. So what really drew me to Taoism was how practical they were.
Mm,
Herbalism and acupuncture come from Taoism, or at least Chinese herbalism does.
mm,
So they're like the scientists of their day. They really mapped out like what leads to greater health, what leads to a greater spiritual connection.
mm.
Um, so and it just appealed to me. So yeah, that's like my 10,000 foot view of what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And also so I practice shamanism, and so I know about the origin of that connection, and something else that uh is our balance with nature, right? So there's no separation between the energies of the universe or around us and who we are,
Yeah,
which really becomes a relief, especially, and now I'm sort of tying it back into depression,
yeah,
to find that you're never alone and that you're always supported in some way.
yeah. In fact, I didn't know this until over like a decade later, at least a decade later. But what I was going through was a spiritual longing as well,
Mm,
which is how a lot of sadness can show up.
sure.
I'm not saying all of it is, but or
Yeah.
every case, but for a lot of people, it really is a longing for that spiritual connection. And when it's absent, you will have ill health as a result.
Yeah, we've got to get ourselves back to the garden, to quote Joni Mitchell.
That's good. Yeah.
It's true, and that makes perfect sense. When we're separated from that which we already are, of course, there's a great melancholy that's attached to that, and a desire to reconnect.
Yeah.
So you were talking. Well, you had sent me some questions that I thought were so interesting, and one of them is resistance. How resistance comes across when, for example, and I deal with this with patients all the time. I know that I don't like where I am.
Mm.
I don't know what to do about it. And when I try something like meditation or whatever, it doesn't work for me. It's not my thing. And we would call that resistance, even if it's not conscious resistance, right?
Yeah.
So how would you define what resistance is and how it shows up?
Um, I would define it as when our acquired personality, not our like eternal soul,
Yeah.
not what we came in here for, but the personality we acquire through our upbringing, through our parents, and through our environment. Then, when it builds out our comfort zone and like our identity, when we like butt up against that,
Mm-hmm.
and then it bounces us back to our original operating mode, even if it's unhealthy, That's resistance.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we can be introduced to a practice that will take us outside our comfort zone. And as a result, even if it's healthy, it's actually going to show up as painful.
Right.
It's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be interpreted by some part of our brain as a threat.
Right.
So we're going to react in a way that you could say it's life preserving. The idea is life preserving. And it's going to show up as whatever is going to be our best reasoning that kind of settles us back into our comfort zone, keeps us safe. That could be, it doesn't work for me, or I don't like this, or oftentimes my teachers will say it kind of falls into categories of need for control, need for approval, or like a lack of surrender. So you'll have like the need for control is like, no, this isn't for me. I'm not doing this. Or a need for approval where someone will follow a teaching or a person, or it could be a parent, and stick with them. And if something healthy comes up that conflicts with that, their need for approval from the authority figure in their life will bypass that, will take it over. And then there's a lack of surrender where we're just so uncomfortable in getting out of our comfort zones. We're not going to surrender to getting into the flow of life. So that's probably how I would define it. And I mean, we all have levels of it. It's not like an either or. It's like peeling back the onion. There's all these kinds of layers of resistance and comfort zone that we're kind of meant to overcome in this time and space world.
Right. And I think it's really important to point that out. So thank you that, we all go through this. It's not like there's anything wrong with anybody when you experience something like that. So what can one do to help break some of those patterns and move through resistance?
Well, I think the first step is the awareness of it. Because I liken it to sort of like the Wizard of Oz. If you, as much as you can pull back the curtain on your own sort of funny psychology, the better. It's not going to like completely resolve it, but it's going to weaken it, because the biggest sort of trick that our comfort zones have is making themselves invisible to us.
Yeah.
Because when we're stuck in an invisible comfort zone, it's pretty much a lost battle at that point, I think. So I like, especially for the really, really thick comfort zones where we've been stuck in self-sabotage and we have this repeating pattern. What I like to do is, and this is taught to me by my teachers, is ask yourself, when was the youngest I felt this way? For instance, if someone runs into a frustration because it's like, well, I don't, this isn't really working for me. It's often, I've done this, it's very helpful to ask, like, well, when is the youngest that I felt disappointed? And who were the players involved?
Yes.
Because it's usually going to be mom, dad. It's always going to be something like that.
Parents.
And by wondering about that and by inquiring into it and remembering, you can start to see it's like, oh, wow, this is a pattern that traces itself back at many, many, many times in my life. And I can remember, it's when I was waiting for my dad to pick me up from school and he just wasn't showing up, and he promised to me. And so you develop a pattern of being extremely skeptical, even of something you try to start. So that's just one example. I think, again, I have a bias against like the kind of pop culture self-help, because it just like, I wasted so much time with it. But this idea that it's like, never mind the past, just like, you can visualize and just look forward and create the life you want. It's like, well, there's a lot of very powerful wiring that came from our past.
That's right.
And it can be, as long as you do it in a healthy way, it can be very beneficial to dive into that. So So that'd be like my kind of, that's like my go-to. If someone keeps running into something, I'm like, all right, let's get in that time machine.
Yeah. So actually that's a great segue to the next question, which is, what was the scariest part of your life and how did you move through it?
Oh, okay. I love the fact that you asked that, because I went through something that I think is universal in going on a spiritual walk, but it's not well known.
Okay.
After I started practicing the standing meditation, I started to turn my life around inwardly. I started feeling the looping thoughts start to quiet down. It wasn't overnight, but it was progress. I'm like, I'll take anything.
Yeah.
So what happened was, and here's the universal part, my life started to get more chaotic. Because most people would think, oh, if I start meditating, I start feeling calm and focused, my life is just going to instantly get better. Ooh, ah. It's like actually what happens. I mean, it's not 100%, but when people start diving into the deep spiritual practices, their life might seem to get worse on the surface.
Yes.
Old friendships will start to get torn from them. They might get pulled out of their present career and into another one.
Right.
They might have greater conflict with their family, and they might think, oh, something's wrong. No. It's actually going to be a good thing. It's like a spiritual detox.
Exactly.
So so my spiritual detox was that I had a falling out with two friends who were business partners. They cut me out of the business. I mean, I literally woke up one day and we were having more and more arguments. I mean, it was everyone's fault, including mine. But I woke up one day and I was trying to log into our email software and our online shopping cart software. Passwords were changed. And I'm just like, oh, whoa, I know what's going on here. Oh, wow. So I had enough presence of mind to be like, all right, you know what? It's not the end of the world. We were kind of still in the startup mode anyway, so I'm just going to let this go. But I realized two things, which was that I'm in so much debt because I had racked up so much debt with my own failed business efforts that I might need to go through a bankruptcy here. And I also need to get a job. And this is a couple of years after the 2008 financial meltdown. It was a pretty close memory. So I'm looking around. I'm standing there in my condo, or I was in an apartment at the time. I'm just like, I have no college degree. I don't really have much of a resume to speak of. What am I going to do?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's like I like meditating, but what am I going to do? So I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to take a job that I can just get really easily. I can do it really well without putting in too much like mental effort, because I still want to pursue some kind of career in business or self-employment. So I hopped on Craigslist and I found actually a job, and the description made me laugh. It was basically just like, you could stand outside all day and you spin a sign advertising a business, and you can listen to music all day, and it's full time. I'm just like, sold. Full time, which is what I need.
Yep.
I can listen to audiobooks all day. Never mind that I listen to some music, but I'm like, this is my chance to keep educating myself. I won't be bothered. I won't have to think, and I can go home and still engage myself mentally.
Wow.
So I'll fast forward to what was the scary part. The scary part was after working this job, and I worked it for almost 3 years. I thought it was going to be like 3 months. No. Turned into 3 years, and it was beautiful. I mean, I know you've spoken in the past on your show about solitude. This was my solitude.
Wow.
Life had shrunk my existence down to a very simple, like, show up, do a good job. It's like the Daoist idea: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Yes. Yeah. Got to live that way. Yep.
This is me doing that. Yeah. And it was beautiful because life was giving me a chance to start over in terms of learning to interact with my supervisors. And I was at the bottom of the totem pole, and I needed that because in my case, I mean, I was depressed. I was also very arrogant. So this is my chance. Life was teaching me to be humble. And I had enough presence of mind to be grateful for the lesson.
Right.
So after 3 years of this, and I had made a lot of progress, I was still meditating every single day. The business itself that I was working for, they went out of business. So after 3 years, I'm like, I felt like I was like right back where I started. I mean, in fact, in a practical way, I was, because I was literally going back on Craigslist to get another job.
Yeah.
And this one, I got another job. and it was loading trucks. And this one was a job where I had to work like at least 12 hours a day. It was brutal, backbreaking labor. And this is the scariest part of my life, because here I'm thinking, I'm doing everything right. In my mind, I'm like, I am walking a spiritual path. I'm working on myself. I've been doing like meditating for 3 years. And now I've got this terrifying job that my body's breaking down. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. That was my scariest moment. And I remember I actually had a mentor at the time. He's a friend. He's still a friend today. He's an author, and he'd been practicing Daoism for decades. His name is Peter Ragnar. And I emailed him, and I was angry. I was just like, and I totally lashed out. I'm just like, dude, I didn't say dude, but I do. I did write. I'm doing what you're teaching. I'm actually doing it. So why is my life getting worse?
Yeah. Great question.
And then I of course I hit send, and I immediately regretted it. I'm just like, not asking, but just the fact that I was so rude about it. So I follow up. I was like, look, I'm sorry. I'm just upset, and I just really want this to work. Fortunately, he was very gracious, and he gave me an answer that was it was a good and bad news answer. And the good news is that I really was turning my life around, because everything starts from the inside out.
Right.
But he said that for outward changes, especially from where I was coming from, it's like an ocean liner turning around. It takes miles.
Yes.
It takes miles for it to go around. And I was just like, okay, fine. But that was the scariest part of my life. But what the cool lesson was, that in all my years of failure, even if I hadn't managed to become that successful business owner I wanted to be, I had actually learned the skill of writing, and also how to advertise and market a business. So what eventually happened was, through a connection, I actually got a job that I really, really loved, writing and helping a business with their marketing. So it was kind of cool how I had been learning and getting prepared for a great career the whole time, even if I was like crawling through all this failure.
Yeah. And it's so amazing to me that those two jobs, in I guess Jungian terms, you might say you had to have your time in the ashes, right? Before you, yeah. So you literally had a sign, and you were able to go into your head, into your mind, and do the education. And then you went to something in your body, physical labor. And then it was like all of a sudden everything kind of came together, and you were able to, you had to have that downtime almost to flush out what was, what needed to be released.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I love that, Carl Jung. That's perfect, because you reminded me, there was one shift as a truck loader, and shifts were, I forget when I started. I think they started at like 1 p.m., but we never finished before midnight. Wow. The worst was 5 a.m. That was a weird day. But I remember at 2 a.m, I mean, the shift had just ended. We'd unloaded and loaded all trucks. By the way, this was a commercial laundry facility, so this was dirty. This is not like your boxes or something. Although I had one that did boxes later. But yeah, this was like construction clothes and uniforms. I had to grab them all by hand. So I remember, like, in the bathroom at the end of this, my face was covered with dirt, just like you said, like dirt and muck. And I was washing my face off, and I looked in the mirror. I'm just like, this is going to be my baptism. I'm just like,
yes.
Everything I've ever done wrong in life, I decided, I'm like, I am now forgiven.
Yep. That's what the time in the ashes is you have to bring it all the way down to that humble place, right? And then you kind of work your way back up. But I mean, it's mythic. That's fantastic. All right, couple more questions. When we meditate, and this is the biggest problem everybody has, is quieting the mind. How do I quiet the mind? I can't, we don't ever stop thinking. So what happens? How do we do that? Or how do you experience it?
Well, that's an important question. what I've found is that, again, talking about like the tricks, like for instance, we talked about the tricks of a comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
The mind has a genius trick, which is that if you try to fight it, you're actually strengthening it.
Mm-hmm.
Our mind is a tool. I mean, it's designed to problem solve, and it's a great tool. So what the Taoists like to do is, I give it the phrase like throwing the dog a bone. What the Taoists like to do is to give the mind a focus. And the Taoists have very body-based meditations in the foundational stages. So focusing on breathing into your belly is one of the ways that you can give your mind something to focus on. And then not only that, but scanning your body for muscular tension. So sitting or standing, what I do is I will think to myself, okay, how's my left shoulder? Is it relaxed as much as I can? Can I breathe into my left shoulder? Just like imagine breathing into it and relax even more. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, now my right has to catch up. All right. Let's relax my right shoulder some more. Okay. Is my neck as relaxed as it could be? Can I imagine it like melting like water into steam?
Yeah.
And then, okay, now that that's good, let me go back to focusing on breathing into my belly. And I'm not necessarily verbally saying all this, but that's
No, it's, yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving my mind a focus on here, a focus on here. And the whole time I'm kind of sowing the seeds for quieting my mind, because what happens when we relax our muscles? What happens when we breathe into our belly? We're calming our central nervous system.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it calms down, our mind will start to calm down a little bit, which allows our muscles to relax more, which allows us to breathe deeper and more openly, which calms the central nervous system, which relaxes the mind, which relaxes our muscles. So it's a very virtuous cycle. So what happens is eventually you can, like a stone skipping, you can hit points where you just, oh, wow, I just slip into the state of not thinking. It just happens. You just slip into it, and then you slip out of it. And that's cool too.
That's life. Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to be your next several decades. You know, it's okay.
Right.
But the idea is when you kind of skirt along those edges like that, that is where the healing happens. And when your mind starts chattering again, that's okay. You just go back to relaxing your body, because even if you go back to thinking again, and you go back to redirecting your focus, you're still doing something really beautiful for your body, because as you relax more, you're processing emotional gunk no matter what. So that's how I do it. I kind of like, I'm a trickster in that way. It's like, okay, brain, if you're going to think, you're going to think on my terms, and you're actually going to back your way into not thinking. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And I love what you said about, changing the nervous system and how it's communicating. Also, there's something very intimate about having the mind work with the body. That in itself is such a beautiful thing to do, which we forget to do. It's like our body somehow feels separate from our mind. We're cut off at the neck. So a meditation like that, or a practice like that, allows us to reconnect with our bodies, which is so important,
Yeah. Yeah. And doing it in a supportive way, because how many of us have an antagonistic relationship between our mind and body? This is like I hate my body.
Right.
Well, now you're learning to support it and be friends with it.
Yeah. And in a non-judgmental way, because it's really just being tasked to pay attention to, where you're holding tension. Beautiful. So before we close, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about your book, The Standing Meditation, and also how people can find it.
Sure. I'd love to. I started writing it 3 years ago. It took me, or 3.5 years ago, actually now. And it took me about 3 years to write. I threw out the entire first draft and started over once. And I basically, the way I wrote it was this: if I could go back in time and find that younger self, that decade younger self, or 12-year younger self, and say, hey, look, I know you're trying, and I know you're searching outside of yourself for all these solutions. here, take this book instead. If I could do that, that's sort of how I wrote the book. I can't go back in time, but the next best thing is for anyone else who's sort of like, I've heard about that spiritual stuff, or I don't know, I tried doing this, and this is like written in a way to start from zero and be like, okay, here's what I went through. Here's the story from this chapter of my life that I went through. Here's what I learned, and here's how it can be applied to a spiritual walk and a meditative practice, and just going through those stages. That's how I wrote the book. And it's at you can go to the website thestandingmeditation.com.
Okay.
And right now that just forwards right to the page where it's on available on Amazon.
Okay, great. How can people reach you? So we have thestandingmeditation.com, which is if you're interested in the book, but where can people find your blog and you?
Oh, I have a blog at naterifkin.com. So it's just my name. And there I've got articles and updates on like where I'm speaking and all that.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yeah.
Okay, good. So, and of course, we'll put these in the show notes, these websites, and so that people can find you. Nate, thank you so much for being on Self Talk.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I was honored to be here.